This song says, no matter who you are, no matter where you go in your life, at some point you're gonna need somebody to stand by you. Oh yeah, oh my darling, stand by me. No matter who you are, no matter where you go in life, you gon' need somebody to stand by you. No matter how much money you got, all the friends you got, you gon' need somebody to stand by you. When the night has come and the land is dark and that moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't shed one tear. Just as long as your people come and stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Come on, stand by me. Yeah. Oh, when that sky that we look upon, when she tumble and fall on the mountains, they should crumble into the sea. I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Please stand by me. Stand by me.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Tom Cummings,
And I'm Dr. Tia Kansara.
and we are here on behalf of the board and Martin Rohner, our executive director, to express how delighted we are that we have all of the members, the supporting partners, sponsors, colleagues, and stakeholders from the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. This is a great moment once a year where we come together, and each year we pick a theme. Our theme this year, Shaping the Future of Finance, Values-Based Banking for a Changing World. It's super
very big-
important. Go ahead, Tia. Yeah.
I just wanted to share just such a big welcome to all of our customers, investors, and our wider public. Over to you, Tom.
One of the things that we do as we come together each time is that we make sure that before we look to the future, that we take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the first peoples with whom we have a connection, a relationship, a deeper sense of place. So we'd like to acknowledge the traditional territories of those who came before us, wherever you are in the world. In my case, it's Batavian people, or wherever you are in the world where you can respectfully acknowledge the indigenous people who have stewarded the land in generations. They all make it possible for us to be here today. Tia and I will be with you for the next 3 days. And we've gone from beautiful Bern into our bedroom boardrooms. I like to say now we want to spend the next 3 days really rekindling the spirit of our collective commitment and our future look at finance. But we need to know where you are and hope that you're with us. So please be sure that you go to the session indicators and you can find from that where it is we need to be. But I'm going to hand over to Tia for a minute and then we're going to get started. Tia.
You know, as we navigate these uncertain times, one thing we can be sure of, and that is the potential risk to our businesses, our communities, and also to our planet. we continue to learn how to collaborate with each other and grow to replenish Earth. I welcome you to make that the most of an incredible lineup of speakers, doers, and global leaders. As Tom mentioned, I'll be co-moderating with Tom. I'm incredibly excited to bring our keynotes. After that, I'll be moderating specifically the Eastern sessions. Some of the highlights will be Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research for Planetary Boundaries, Kate Woolworth from the University of Oxford, Gladys Kalima Zukusoka, who will talk to us about the great apes and what we can learn from them, even when it comes to banking. Salim Hussain, the Managing Director of BRAC Bank. You'll find all of this and more in the CVent platform, the welcome pack. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Tia. And more to come, we'll say later. It's now my pleasure to introduce a person who doesn't need an introduction to many of you, Peter Blom, the chair of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values and the CEO of Triodos Bank. I've had the privilege of working with Peter since the founding of the Alliance. We want to acknowledge that Peter has already played an outsized role in shaping the future of finance. So, Peter, it's over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tia. Good to be here. Dear friends, warmly welcome to you and on the 30th GABV annual conference. This year's meeting is different in many ways, not least because it's virtual, creating opportunities to include many more people, that's a good thing, engage some extraordinary speakers, and radically reduce our carbon footprint. The meeting is happening in a time of unprecedented change and uncertainty. From the climate emergency to racial unrest and reconciliation, of course, the pandemic. And once again, banking and bankers are at the center stage this time. However, not as the cause of the crisis, but potentially as the agents for change that will make all the difference for the future. What started as a health crisis is now reaching all areas of our lives. In some areas, the change will be minute. In others, it will be radical and profound. But one thing is certain, nothing will stay the same. Banks, as I said, will play a pivotal role in rebuilding the economy, a more sustainable and a more just economy. As value-based bankers, we cannot leave it to the traditional banks to dictate the future of finance. We must take the lead and show the way, as we have done for many decades, by envisaging the kind of future we want, in service of our clients, of course. We too will have to adapt and develop. But as the world transforms around us, our value-based approach is more relevant now than it has been ever. And it's a good challenge to have. Over the coming 3 days, we will explore imminent change from different angles and perspectives. And what this means for us as a movement, as bankers, and as human beings, of course. I'm delighted that we will be hearing from so many eminent speakers and that we can reconnect this way. I'm extremely grateful to Sunrise Bank for hosting this year's annual meeting. Sunrise Bank is a leader in social innovation and digital technology. It was only natural to turn to David Reiling and his team when we were looking for the host for a first ever virtual annual meeting for the GABV. Thank you, David, and your team, and thank the Sunrise Bank in general for hosting us in this remarkable event. We very much look forward to learning more about Sunrise Bank as our host, the region you operate in, and your influence internationally during the days to come. So once again, welcome, dear fellow CEOs, dear governing board members, dear colleagues and guests, to shaping the future of finance, value-based banking for a changing world. Thank you so much. Over to David.
Thanks, Peter. Welcome, everyone, to the 13th GABV annual meeting. Sunrise is thrilled to be your host for this year's meeting. While we cannot be in person this year, we have tried to capture the traditions of our previous meetings and leverage the advantages of being virtual. I'd like to just take a moment to thank our sponsors, Nice Actimize, Winthrop and Weinstein, our featured sponsors, and RSM and Novogradic. So speaking of advantages, I also want to extend a warm welcome to the first-time attendees. There are a lot of you this time, and it is great to have you here. So please have the courage to introduce yourself, participate. This is one big values-based banking family, so feel at home here and step out and have the courage to introduce yourself and to make some new friends. I would like to begin with a tradition that Tom Cummings basically touched on in the beginning, but I actually learned from the annual meeting many years ago in Melbourne, hosted by Bank Australia, and it is a reconciliation statement. But first, a little history. So Minnesota was strategically important to the Native American people dating back thousands of years. This is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. They used the waterways for transportation and food and developed extensive trade relationships with other Native people. By the 1600s, there were two main groups of people present in what is today Minnesota, and those are the Dakota and the Ojibwe. I would like to pay my respects to those indigenous people of this land and their elders, both past and present. Also, in light of the tragic event of George Floyd right here in Minneapolis that sparked unrest and ignited a global conversation on race, I would also like to recognize the contributions the people of color have made to this country. Well, what a year it has been. 1 year ago, this meeting was the last in-person meeting in Bern, Switzerland. If we were just 1 week later, our event wouldn't have taken place. I remember a beautiful snowfall landing in the Ara River at our meeting. I also remember listening to Ugo from Bank Etica in Italy and learning what was transpiring in the early days of the pandemic, and quite honestly, feeling very anxious. We are now in our own country, city, home, or office, but we are digitally transported to the United States, to a state called Minnesota, and a pair of cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, separated by a river called the Mississippi, which starts as only a drip and a trickle of water from the northern part of the state near the Canadian border and grows large and wide and flows across the country north to south to the Gulf of Mexico. We have a robust agenda for the next 2 days. This is truly a global event, and as such, you will have jet lag without leaving home. So don't worry, you can sleep it off over the weekend. We are going to present, we are going to question, discuss, and debate issues facing values-based bankers in a changing world. Please note, we are here at this conference to shape the future of finance. We're going to tackle the topics of climate change, the economy, diversity, equity, inclusion, and technology, just to mention a few. We will engage in our community with our communities of practice. We will learn a little bit about Sunrise Banks and its customers through learning journeys. We will network and catch up with existing colleagues and friends and hopefully meet new ones. And we will commemorate those who are no longer with us. I encourage you to participate to the fullest. To the best of your ability, leave the day-to-day aside and invest this precious time with your colleagues in this movement we call values-based banking. Find out, ask yourself, how are my colleagues financing change to change finance? Be a part of the conversation. Don't be shy. Get in that chat, network as much as possible. Feel free to have that extra glass of wine or extra cup of tea during networking time, as no one's gonna know what time zone you're in anyways. So as in a lot of things this year, this event is a learning process, one in which we will gain capabilities and knowledge on how to improve our communication and engagement being a world apart. And while our desire in the future is to share one another's company in person, we certainly can include more people by leveraging this technology. So please enjoy the conference. We look forward to seeing you in the sessions and connecting during the networking. So Peter, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, David. On a serious note, you have heard that our dear colleague and friend, Kurt Koenigsvest, passed away on the 11th of February. This came as a terrible shock for all of us, and it is still hard to fathom. that Kurt is no longer among us. Kurt was a close personal and professional friend to many of us. At the time of his passing, Kurt served as CEO of Banco Sol, Bolivia's largest microfinance bank, and on the GABV board as the chair of the Latin American chapter. Kurt led Banco Sol from 2000 and created a real financial inclusion champion. Under his leadership, Banco Sol supported over 1.5 million low-income customers and small businesses with the financial services they needed to grow and thrive. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Kurt remained highly engaged and oversaw the rollout of digital financial products that allowed customers to continue to access essential financial services during lockdown while ensuring the safety of the bank staff. Kurt was on the board of the GABV for 6 years. He was a visionary in the world of inclusive finance and an important voice for Latin America in the value-based banking movement. He was always passionate about his work in Bolivia, the customers of Banco Sol serves, and about our movement. Kurt played an important role in developing the Latin American chapter of the GABV, and we will benefit from his contribution for many years to come. Thank you so much for these nice pictures of Kurt. And please join me now for a moment of silence in Kurt's honor. Thank you. Thank you for this precious moment. And over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Peter. I think this is a really special moment, and I also just want to acknowledge what a remarkable human being Kurt is and was, and how much we will miss him, especially also for our Latin American colleagues, where he was a real giant in his field. I would like to transition now to our feature speaker for our first session, and I am delighted to introduce Johan Rockström. You have his biography, so you can see who he is. What I want to say a little bit is what I know of Johan, and that is he is a committed field scientist. And this is really important, that not only has he worked the theoretical side of his disciplines, but he has also been out there in the field. And as one of the greats in field science, E.O. Wilson, once told me, there are too few field scientists in the world. So I am very happy to have Johan here with us. He is going to take us on a very fast whirlwind tour, 10 years to transform humanity, a whole Earth perspective. And I think, Johan, you're all ready to go. You're there?
Yes, thanks, Tom, and
Okay.
hello, everyone. This is a great opportunity and an honor to join you here. I'd like to give you a scientific update and hopefully give you some valuable conclusions from where we are in the diagnostic of humanity's future on Earth as inputs also for the banking sector. If you take next, please. Now, the starting point for any scientific scanning and outlook of our decade to come, but also the decades to come, is the most important message from the scientific community over the last decade, which is the conclusion that we've entered the Anthropocene. We, the modern enterprise of our globalized world, has become our own geological epoch. Anthros for humans. We're exiting the Holocene, the warm, stable interglacial we've been in since we left the last ice age 20,000 years ago, and we have now become the dominant force of change on planet Earth. We now surpass the natural variability of solar orbiting, of volcanic eruptions, of earthquakes. We are the ones determining the state of the planet. So much so that the pandemic is but a manifestation of the Anthropocene. It is a predicted, expected outcome of a globalized world putting so much pressure on all the living systems on Earth that this is what we can expect in turbulence with scale, speed, and interconnectivity at an unprecedented scale. Next, please. Now, we see many consequences of these impacts already today, and you're so well aware of them, so I'll go very fast through the current situation at 1.2 degrees Celsius warming from compared to the pre-industrial average temperature of 14 degrees Celsius on Earth. I try to remind people that 1.2 is a very large, unprecedented pace of warming. It's actually the warmest temperature on Earth since we left the last ice age. And we see here the last 6 years, which are the 6 most warm observed years on record. 1998 is also in this group, but the last 6 years are among the warmest. And what is important to recognize here is how this is distributed spatially on planet Earth. And look at the red zones up in the Arctic region, and I'll come back to this, which is the ground zero today on warming, which is not at 1 degree, but actually at 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warming already today. And if you take the next slide, we have already indications of how this is playing out with not only the heat waves and the floods and the disease patterns and forest fires, but also 2020 with a 38 degrees Celsius observed temperature in Siberia, exactly where we have the massive hundreds of gigatons, billion tons of carbon locked into frozen soil in permafrost. These are the kind of abrupt changes that we are starting to observe at 1.2 degrees Celsius warming. If you take next, please. We have summaries of these impacts already today. I just want to point you to what I find to be the best, really dense and authoritative summary of the United in Science 2020, which gives a run-through of all the impacts in terms of disease, forest fires, abrupt changes in ecosystems, and the frequency of heat waves, droughts, and record temperatures. Next. We have also a tradition today in the scientific community to try and every year provide climate negotiators. So this is handed over to Patricia Espinosa, the head of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, who leads the climate negotiations, what we call the 10 new insights in climate science. This is an effort of trying to hand over the 10 most important scientific advancements over the last year. I won't go through all these 10. I just recommend you to just Google new insights in climate science and you'll come into this. But I still have to mention the 3 first ones. The number one is that in a few months' time, the 6th assessment of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, will release its 6th report. And as you may know, the holy grail in climate science is the so-called climate sensitivity, which is the magical parameter, which scientifically is the one that all climate models are kind of striving for, which is to answer the question, if we double the amount of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, what's the expected warming on planet Earth? Now, as you may know, for 100 years, that range has been in the order of 1.5 to 4.5 degrees Celsius at a doubling of the concentration of greenhouse gases, going from 280 ppm of carbon dioxide, the pre-industrial level, to 560 ppm. We are today at 415 ppm, and we are following a path that would take us to the doubling in roughly 15 to 30 years' time, if we do not bend the curve. Now, this range is, of course, a very uncomfortable uncertainty range because it's between 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a manageable future, to a catastrophic future of 4.5 degrees. Now, this year, in the sixth assessment coming out in a few months' time, the range will be narrowed slightly to between 2.3 and 4.5, which is a very significant scientific advancement. It is based on all the supercomputing power and higher resolution in our ability to represent weather, ice dynamics, ocean dynamics, and how the atmosphere interacts with the biosphere. But still, it's a very wide range. 2.3 to 4.5 is quite uncomfortable for actors like banking sector, insurance sectors, and companies. But what I want to reassure you, even before the IPCC report comes out, that it is a very important advancement, and it's a range between very dangerous future, 2.3, and a catastrophic future, 4.5. And that is the conclusion that will be coming in a few months' time in the IPCC. But even more important is the following. That uncertainty range, which comes out of our burning of fossil fuels leading to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, does not include the insight number 2, which is that we see more and more signs of permafrost releasing methane and carbon from soils. And it's not included in the range of climate sensitivity from dangerous to catastrophic. And the third insight is that we see more and more scientific publications showing that forests and soils are gradually losing capacity of carbon dioxide uptake. And that is also not included in the climate sensitivity. So if you as bankers want to feel, reassured in terms of the unequivocal scientific conclusions, is that even though there is uncertainty in science, if you add all the elements of evidence, there is zero uncertainty, because even the climate sensitivity range between dangerous and disastrous is an underestimate, because we're not even including permafrost and all the natural ecosystems gradual loss of capacity of taking up carbon dioxide. So the situation is undoubtedly very challenging. Next, please. This is starting to be well understood. You are in the frontier here. The World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, as I'm sure you're aware, comes out year after year with its risk assessment. If you click next, please. We also see again in 2021 that the upper right-hand risk corner here, which is the assessment of the most likely risks, costly economic risks for businesses, and the most impactful impacts, again incorporate primarily our inabilities of acting on climate, heat waves, biodiversity loss, extreme events. Again, the risk assessment, as understood in the private sector across the world, is in the realm of global environmental change and abrupt shifts. And of course, you see infectious disease outbreaks up exactly in this risk landscape. Next, please. So we see an understanding. We see a deeper verification that this is well anchored among citizens across the world. That's also, I think, very reassuring for the private banking sector, that 70% of citizens in the US, despite how climate change is portrayed in a very biased way in media still today, but still under that surface, 70% of citizens are deeply concerned about human-caused climate change and want climate action. In the world's biggest opinion poll hosted by UNDP, that number is verified across the entire world. Between 60 and 70% of citizens from China to India to African nations to European nations to South America are deeply concerned about climate change and want action. So never before have we had such a mature understanding among citizens across the entire world that we are in a climate crisis. Next, please. Now, this is the situation today, but I want to take you deeper down into our understanding by focusing in on this little beautiful blue dot, namely the state of our entire planet. Next, please. Now, this is what I would argue potentially for all citizens, but I would like to hand it over to as something important for you as well, particularly for you, namely the potentially most important breakthrough in climate modeling over the last year. What you see in this graph is the first time ever a climate model based only on physics and mathematics is able to reproduce the entire cycling between ice ages and interglacials over the past 3 million years. So what you see here is the entire Quaternary period. It includes 2 epochs, the Pleistocene and the Holocene. And it's 3 million years on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you see average global mean temperature, and the 0 point is pre-industrial 14 degrees Celsius warming. The green line is the model simulation, and the black line is verification data from ice cores and proxy data from tree rings. So that's the calibration line. What you see is, and that to me is more than just scientific findings, it really takes you right deep into heart and emotions, basically, that not at one point during the entire 3 million year journey has average temperatures past 2 degrees. The planet has remained within a very narrow corridor at the warmest level, 2 degrees, and at the coldest level, deep ice age, -4 to 5 degrees. And that's the corridor. The planet has been staying within this corridor despite all the forcings from external forcings, and has been oscillating in and out of ice ages and interglacials within this very narrow corridor. If you take next, this is, one could argue, the question is, do we really need more scientific evidence to deliver on the Paris Agreement? Just looking at that graph, that we've never been outside of 2 in the existence of planet Earth in the configuration as we know it, should be, I would argue, enough for action. We also know that the situation for us as our modern civilizations is even more, let's say, dire, because this is, from that previous graph, the last 20,000 years. We leave the last ice age. Again, on the y-axis is global mean temperature, the 0 point being the 14 degree Celsius pre-industrial level. And look at the Holocene. Look at that blue line, the last 12,000 years, which is the period when we have developed modern civilization. We've been around on planet Earth for, up to 200,000 years, but we've been hunters and gatherers, very few million people living in very dire, predominantly ice age conditions. But then we enter the Holocene, and that's when we invent agriculture and we take off in the modern civilizational journey as we know it. And that world is not even within this corridor, the Pleistocene corridor, +2 to -4. It's within a ±1 degree Celsius corridor. ±1 degree. We are already hitting the ceiling of the whole Holocene corridor. And look at the red line where we're heading. We are on a pathway that would take us to 3-4 degrees Celsius warming in just 80 years' time, a point the Earth has not been in for the past 5 to 10 million years. Again, do we need more science for action? Next, please. Now, as if this was not enough, the humbling recognition of this narrow Pleistocene corridor, the +2 to -4, is particularly deep in its insight because we know why the planet has stayed within this corridor. It's not because the sun has been so gentle to us. It is because the Earth system has such very strong resilience and ability to dampen and land softly under stress. And that is proven in this graph. This is from the Global Carbon Project, the authoritative annual assessment of all greenhouse gas flows in the Earth system. What you see on the x-axis here is from the Industrial Revolution 1850 until today. Y-axis, you see annual emissions of carbon. So this is our annual emissions. Above the x-axis, you see in gray burning of fossil fuels. and in orange, cutting down trees and degrading ecosystems. So this is our hockey stick of pressure on Earth. But is it all of this that has caused 1.2 degrees Celsius warming? The answer is no, because below the x-axis, you see the Earth system response. In dark green, you have the gradual increase of ocean uptake of carbon. In light green, you see the gradual increase of uptake of carbon on land. And it's only the blue wedge there, the residual, which has led to 1.2 degrees Celsius warming, because that's the carbon dioxide remaining in the atmosphere. And of course, you just look at this graph and you see, oh my God, the more we abuse the system, the more planet Earth has been serving us as its best friend by its biogeochemical processes and absorbs more and more carbon dioxide. This is proof that under stress, the Earth system in a resilient state tries to stay within the narrow corridor. And the drama is, if you click again, that we see more and more scientific evidence that the Earth system is gradually showing signs of losing this capacity. Land areas from Amazon rainforest to bark beetle infested Canadian temperate forest to European forest fire and drought infected forest are gradually losing carbon dioxide uptake capacity. This is what makes scientific community really, really nervous, because we know that the capacity to remain in the corridor is bounded by Earth system capacity to remain stable. Next, please. Now, we see the connections with the economy, with the banking sector, with the whole financial sector, in the phenomenally important Das Gupta report that came just a few weeks ago. This is the sister to the Stern review, the economics of biodiversity, showing what enormous value the resilience in the Earth system has, not only for climate stability, but also for all ecosystem services supporting humans and our economy. Next, please. We have made the first attempt of an update of understanding what is at stake in terms of the risks of crossing tipping points that could irreversibly push ourselves away from the corridor. The first assessment came out in 2008, called the Tipping Elements Analysis, led by Tim Lenton and colleagues at Exeter. Just before the pandemic, we did this update you see here, where we scanned through the 15 known so-called tipping elements, the big biophysical system that we know scientifically contribute to enable the planet to stay within the corridor, and we looked at the state of these systems. Here you see in black the 9 systems that show indications of being destabilized, being gradually showing signs of moving towards tipping points. It's not that they have crossed tipping points, but they show signs of slowing down, of increased variability, of none, outside of average behavior. So this is worrying. But even more important is that we start to see more and more scientific evidence that they are connected with each other. So look at the arrows here and how many arrows are actually connected up to the Arctic. You can see that the ice melt in the Arctic and on Greenland affects the temperature in the North Atlantic, the middle square there on the Atlantic overturning circulation of heat, which in turn has an arrow down to the Amazon rainforest and the rainfall patterns, which affects droughts and forest fires in the Amazon. But it even connects to the temperature of surface oceans down in West Antarctica. So it appears increasingly from the science we have today that what happens in the Arctic is like a ground zero of what's happening across the entire planet. And you recall the first maps I showed you, how global warming is now at 2-3 degrees Celsius warming up at that sensitive point. So that's a situation that calls for rapid action. Next, please. And that is why, in my transition to the kind of the next closing phase here, why we need a framework like Planetary Boundaries, scientifically defining a safe operating space, shown here in gray, for all the 9 systems that regulates the state of the planet, which is not only climate change, it's also biodiversity, land, water, nutrients, chemicals, stratospheric ozone layer, the ocean stability. We know a lot today of the function of the Earth system, and we have today assessment that 4 of the 9 boundaries are in red and yellow in a danger zone, or even so far that we start seeing risks of tipping points. So this is the transition we now need to see that can be quantified in terms of science-based targets, and I'll come to that in how this can be operationalized. Next, please. Now, in terms of operationalization, I want to share with you in the banking sector that we are translating Earth system science of planetary boundaries into operational tools at country level, like in Germany and New Zealand, but also at the European Union level, but even at state level, like in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. So we see more and more interest among companies, among countries, of taking science into science-based targets to be operationalized to guide both business, cities, and countries in how they can develop within a safe operating space of planetary boundaries. Next, please. This is just to show that we can quantify this. We presented this for Jacinda Ardern and her government in New Zealand just a few months back in the midst of the pandemic, showing how a country can align with planetary boundaries based on quantifications across sectors in the economy, and that this can be a complementary tool to policies guiding towards sustainability. Next. But it all has to do with major challenges that also connect not only environment, but also with the human predicament. So I want to also connect this to the what I would call personally today one of the most fearful outcomes of our latest assessments. This came out a few months back in a scientific publication linking health with climate outcomes and social instability. What you see here is in color the countries in the world graded according to socioeconomic fragility. This is standard maps. The redder, the more fragile the economies. What you see in black spaces here are the regions in the world that today are estimated to have an annual mean temperature of above 29 degrees Celsius. This is a very important threshold because it's a health diagnostic threshold. Above that point, in average temperatures, you are in geographic zones with very high likelihood of unhealth, potentially threatening, and mortality risks. So it's not surprising that these black dots are in very few points in the Sahara Desert with very few people hosted in those regions. But in the hashed lines is, in the latest climate modeling, the regions that by 2070, if we continue burning fossil fuels as today, that would be in regions with at least 29 degrees Celsius of mean annual temperature. Just staggering areas, and hosting, Brazil, West African nations, Middle East, Horn of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, with an estimated population of 3.5 billion people, living in regions where the poorest majorities would actually be threatened, basically threatened to life. And that, of course, you don't need much more science to recognize the risks coming with that situation. And if you take next, the risks are actually increasingly studied. Here is an effort of showing that even Nobel Prize Bill Nordhaus is underestimating risks for the economy if you allow temperatures to go too high. This is a business as usual assessment, putting much better damage functions and social costs of carbon into the economic models, showing in dark red the regions that will lose more than 20% of GDP due to just heat wave impacts. And if you take the next here and just combine the two maps, if you just combine the heat wave map and the lower graph and the economic assessment, you can see a very scary interaction of global warming, unhealth, and vulnerability and economic impacts, and you have a recipe for the kind of perfect storms we do not want to see, which can lead to displacement, migration, and conflict. And that, of course, does not stay static in the geographic zones we are, but it could spill over into other parts of the world. Next, please. So we have increasingly scientific publications like this one showing assessment in dark red of the regions that are most likely to see migration due to environmental change. So, you can see a red thread here of how we are not any longer talking about environmental problems, we're talking about interactive impacts of social and ecological dynamics that can have outcomes for economies, for stability, for security, for peace, and for health. Next, please. So this is the journey we have to pass to avoid this outcome, following the green pathway here of bending the global curve of emissions and reaching a net zero world economy by 2050 to have a 66% chance of landing safely at 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. The red and orange lines here are where we're heading. The red was the Paris. The orange are the latest pledges as we know them. We hope that we will get a major improvement at the Glasgow COP26. But this is the journey we're following. And you take next here, it is not enough to only decarbonize the world's energy system, which is shown here in gray. It follows actually what we call the carbon law of cutting emissions by half every decade. We also know we're talking of a food systems transition with the brown wedge, the single largest emitter sector in the world, to become a carbon sink in orange. But we also must recognize that there are no scenarios in the IPCC that takes us safely to Paris without scaling carbon capture and storage in orange. And we also need to keep the carbon sinks in ecosystems intact in green and blue. So it is a global sustainability transition, even just to deliver on climate. Next, please. Now, I just want to take you through, just so you've heard it because you're in the banking sector. So these are the budgets remaining for us to land safely at 1.5 degrees Celsius warming with a 50% chance is 580 gigatons. Now we emit roughly 40 per year, so it gives us, 12, 13 years of continued burning as today. So that's why we conclude that we've entered the decisive decade when we need to turn things around. But if you take the next slide, this is from the latest Shell Sky scenario, which you may be running into in your work. And I just want to say that they give the impression that we can sort of say deliver on 1.5 by landing at a zero emissions by 2060, as you see here, and allowing ourselves to emit roughly 1,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide up until that point, which is allowed just because they assume tremendous negative emissions by scaling CCS at 450 gigatons. And if you take the next slide, please, if you click again, most scenarios of this is good. You can stay, no, go back one. Here we are. So this is an assessment that is overly optimistic because it assumes massive negative emissions, and it also assumes tremendous afforestation, actually an area equivalent to Brazil, which is the only reason why these kind of scenarios allow the global emission trajectory to go so slowly that it reaches zero around 2060, 2070. And it's just to recognize that the IPCC is the most authoritative source of these kind of scientific scenarios, and that when we conclude scientifically that we need to have net zero emissions by 2050 in 30 years' time, that is the most authoritative assessment that we have today. And any other assessments are often based on assumptions that are unrealistic. And in this case, it is about massive afforestation that allows us to move much slower in phasing out fossil fuels. Next. Take next again, forward. I think you went backwards there. If you go forward, there we are. We also have the economic assessments today quite well established with regards to not only the energy system, but also for the food system. You may have seen this Food and Land Use Coalition report that shows that the market value of food, which is roughly 10 trillion US dollars per year in the furthest left here, that's the market value on the market. But if you take all the hidden costs, environmental costs, health costs, you end up in a situation, even in a conservative assessment, that the real cost of the food systems is roughly 12 trillion US dollars. So we are cheating ourselves in terms of giving the appearance that we have short-term benefits, but in fact, we're causing long-term costs that are undermining both livelihoods and planetary stability. So again, into the economic sphere, we have more and more quantifications and tools to assess both on climate and on nature. Next, please. So I'll just round this off with where is science then able to connect with you? Well, this is really in defining science-based targets. And if you take the next, where we today have the Global Commons Alliance, which is a network of businesses, scientists, and policy trying to define scientifically through the Earth Commission science-based targets beyond climate for all the planetary boundaries and translate these to operational science-based targets for businesses and cities. And we don't have banks involved here, but this is something that I've been exchanging a little bit with Tom, that we can actually have. It would be great to see if we have an opportunity to engage deeper in this initiative. Next, please. And we do try to also connect this with the exponential roadmaps led by Christiana Figueres on what are the pathways to deliver then on cutting emissions by half every decade. And you take next. This is something that we can do. We have so many of the technologies, and I think you're sitting so centrally here because you're part of the investment schemes on investing on the wedges that can take us to cutting emissions by half across different sectors, and we can increasingly show that this is no longer utopia. We can do this in different sectors. Next. And Nigel Topping, leading the run-up to COP26 in the Race to Zero dialogues, are proving this, that business sectors across the world are able to deliver. Next. And of course, we today have a completely new situation with what I call a G3 on climate, with the Biden administration, the European Union, and China aligning behind science-based targets for net zero emissions by 2050 for the US and European Union, and no later than 2060 for China. So this is, I mean, for a banking sector, incredibly exciting how the world's three biggest economies are aligning. Next, please. And of course, Mark Carney is the one driving this, and you have more connections there than I have. But I think it's a mature moment now to see how finance, science, and good outcomes for humanity are aligning. And I think COP26 will be a fundamental moment where that whole private finance systems for net zero will come forward in a way that we haven't seen before. Next, please. So overall, are we in a tipping point? I think it's the judge is still out there, but there's a lot of pressures in terms of progress and market forces, and you are among them, but also technological innovations and science, indicating that this is a very exciting moment indeed. I mean, it's a bit scary, but it's also a moment of dynamic movement, turbulence, and change. And I think now is the time to grasp the opportunity. Next. And thereby, I just leave you with this graph, which is, I think, in my mind, the rebooting of putting the Sustainable Development Goals inside a stable and resilient planet, inside the safe operating space of planetary boundaries, and that people-planet alignment is no longer just rhetorics. It really is science-based operationalization. And I think that would be wonderful to see even more in the banking sector. And with that, I hand back to Tom and Tia. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. I just want to invite everybody to ask questions to Dr. Rockström. Please navigate to the question and answer function on the right, where you can share your questions and also upvote those of others. And I will be liaising with you on those. Tom.
Super, Tia. Johan, one of the things, just as a human who has gone through this pathway, you know, we started having these conversations back at the Copenhagen time out in Greenland, where we were taking senior business leaders. I'm wondering, in that arc of experience that you've had, what is it that has shifted in your own concerns, both in terms of the climate work and in terms of what humanity needs to do? So just first to get a delta on your own evolution of understanding and what we really need to pay attention to now.
Yeah, I remember, Tom, that, I mean, the first times you and I were walking the melting ice sheets in Ilulissat was even before the first planetary boundary paper was published. I mean, we're talking 2007, 2008. The first planetary boundary paper was published in 2009. I was at that time gathering Earth system scientists to do the diagnostic, and there was really deep reason for concern already then. And if you draw a line from that point in 2008 until today, the red thread in science, unfortunately, is that we can say one thing for certain, and that is that we've been underestimating the pace of change right through that period. Things are changing faster than we had anticipated. So everything is basically occurring as we assessed it, but it's happening slightly earlier than we had thought. We hadn't expected coral reef systems to cross irreversible thresholds so fast. We hadn't expected the Arctic sea ice to melt so fast. We hadn't expected the AMOC to slow down by 15%. We hadn't expected the West Antarctic ice shelves to cross tipping points as they have. So things we knew about them, but they're changing faster than we thought. That's one insight. The other very strong insight is also that I think we underestimated the abrupt momentum of change, because right through this period, very little happened. I mean, with Copenhagen failing, and then we lost another 5 years before Paris and all the enthusiasm there, but very little happened follow up on that. And now we see this sudden massive mobilization in different business sectors. So I think there's an abrupt positive change there as well. So it's a kind of a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. And if we think about those pressure points where the financial system can really get in there and make a difference, I know you talked to some of the larger structural banks, but as you think about this group of banks working in the real economy, having direct interactions with their clients and transforming their businesses, what strikes you as something that really must be done?
I think there are several things. I mean, to begin with, I think we should, nobody can today in this connected digital world of of 2021 underestimating the power of collective engagement at whatever scale. I mean, one can have tipping points that can scale positively in underestimated ways. That's one. But secondly, I think it's important to recognize that today it's easy to jump straight at technologies and solutions when one should recognize that perhaps the most important thing we can do is talk to each other, is to engage together in conversations. And I think you can be a very important network because you engage with your customers and their friends and families, and that just the fact of aligning sustainability as the most preferred desired pathway, I think cannot be done in a you can simply not underdo it irrespective of what scale you're working in. So I think your alliance can play a larger role than you can expect in many cases, thanks to the fact that you have a web. And I think that is something that we need to see at this point, that conversation going more and more active.
Mm-hmm. Tia?
We've got some beautiful questions coming in. So the highest voted question is, what's your view on the possibilities of regenerative agriculture in rebuilding soil and storing carbon?
Yeah, so Tom was referring to my field anchoring, and actually my field anchoring is in agriculture. So I've been doing not only hydrology and agroclimatology, but I've been working in Africa for almost 15 years with small-scale rainfed farming and innovations in small-scale farming. And I would say that one of the most promising technologies today for regenerative agriculture is to transform from our plow-based mechanized agriculture to conservation agriculture, which is to learn from nature and to have minimum disturbance of soils so that we learn from nature and redo what nature's doing by having everything from zero tillage to new forms of crop rotations. And we can build organic carbon in a very significant way. And you can talk to any farmer, and he or she will tell you that the best thing you can do with your soil is to have organic carbon, because it improves water holding capacity, rainfall infiltration, productivity, biology in the soil, gives better outcomes for food security and yields. So there is really a regenerative agricultural revolution around the corner. We see these technologies advancing, and we also see science today advancing something that I would call very close to an agricultural revolution, which is, we all depend on annual crops today: wheat, corn, maize, sorghum, millet, that farmers need to plow the land and plant every year. A lot of diesel and a lot of soil disturbance that leads just to loss of organic carbon. But there are institutes around the world that are doing genetic research on perennial cereals. So you could just imagine if you could plant a wheat crop and it can be a perennial with root systems that go down 3 meters, biomass growing even stronger, and you just harvest your wheat 4, 5, 6, 7 years. That, I think, is the regenerative agriculture that we may be seeing around the corner. And this is so fundamentally important also because not only can agriculture then turn into a carbon sink instead of being a source, we don't have to expand agriculture, because we have to recognize today that we've come to the end of the road of expanding agriculture into natural ecosystems. It's only the natural ecosystem that gives us that green wedge I showed earlier of carbon uptake. All the agricultural land, all the land that we have transformed, is a carbon source, is emitting greenhouse gases. So the patches, the 50 or so % of land that is still at its natural state, or at least reasonably natural state, is still taking up carbon dioxide, and we have to maintain that.
Our next question is, where are we with the application of your research on the carbon law? Is it really possible to have a law that governs the global commons, and how does this affect the banking sector?
Yes, so I would advise you to have a look at something called the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. So if you Google Exponential Roadmap, you'll come to an initiative with companies around the world that adopt the carbon law and try to follow that. So not only do what more and more companies in the world are doing to set a net zero target to 2050, but also say we're going to reach net zero 2050 by following the carbon law, which is cutting emissions by half every decade. It's really exciting because it gives you the possibility as a bank or a company to basically have quantitative targets for emission reductions every year, and that is very measurable. So that is increasingly happening. But I mean, one should be honest here to say we're talking hundreds of companies, not thousands of companies. So again, we need to scale this. For the banking sector, I mean, I think you can do many important things here. I mean, of course, look at your own value chain, but in particular, to set standards in all your loans and all your investments and all your engagement with customers, to say, look, we put this as a criteria for assessing different investment areas, but also in terms of guiding customers. So I think there is a kind of a relationship here between bank and customer that is potentially very important.
Sure. Just a quick question. Have there been studies done on the climate impacts of cryptocurrency mining? And if there are, could you please share them?
Yes, there has been a few, particularly on energy requirements and carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions from running those computer centers. I couldn't point you at a specific study. I know that the numbers are very large. I mean, that they can be double-digit impacts on consuming the remaining carbon budget. But I'll have to follow up with you, Tom, to try and find that paper. There is a study on quantifying, not today, but potential impacts if we just continue Bitcoin mining.
And the final one, is net zero already too late?
No, net zero is never too late. Aiming for net zero. The question is it too late? Are we too late on the trajectory towards net zero with regard to the risk of crossing 1.5? Even there, I would say it's not too late. I mean, the window is however barely open. We're very close to close it. There are many scientists that say that it is too late for 1.5, but my conclusion is still that 1.5 is possible. We are at 1.2. We have 300-400 billion tons of carbon dioxide remaining in the mainstream assessment from the IPCC. If we keep away from the tipping points and cut emissions by half every decade and have a world that lands at zero at 2050 in 30 years' time, then I think there is a chance. There is a risk of overshoot for 30, 40 years that we are at risk of reaching 1.6, 1.7 for some time. That will be very scary because we risk losing all inland glaciers and we don't know what happens with Greenland during such overshoot period. But if we stop emitting, then we have a large chance of kind of landing gradually at 1.5. So I would say it's definitely still possible, and it's our Earth shot. It's like the Earth shot we have.
Thank you, Johan.
Johan, I'll add one more for our banks that are not in the global north. As you look at the circumstances that they're facing in their own economies, given COVID, what are some of the things that you think could combine both their social work that they're doing and impact with climate impact, so that way we get this double premium going forward? Because many of our banks will say we have plenty on our hands in just simply dealing with the social and economic concerns of our countries.
Yeah, well, that's a very important question, and of course, an obvious first answer is to try and make as visible as possible, and preferably even quantify all the co-benefits that arise from investments, from bank investments in following the carbon law. And just to take one example, we know that if one puts investments behind renewable energy systems, we immediately get a co-benefit in terms of air quality, which in turn gets co-benefits in the health system. So you get, and we know that a pandemic like COVID is a lung infection. So what you want to have is healthy lungs, but you don't have healthy lungs in Lagos or Nairobi or Addis Ababa or New Delhi. And that is a vulnerability point that I think is a very strong argument for investments along sustainability pathways. But then I think it's also quite exciting to see how we have increasing studies showing that investing in the green investment areas can generate more jobs and better outcomes also for the job market. And even for the economies. I mean, there are several studies coming out showing that the green recovery after COVID can get better economic outcomes. I mean, even if you measure it in very conventional terms, by investing in the new economy. So, I mean, there are many good arguments to be made also from a commercial perspective.
Johan Rockström, thank you very much. Very much appreciated that you take your time and join us and give us our first keynote and overview of what we need to be thinking about it, both for humanity and the Earth. And we will take you up on your Global Commons Alliance suggestion. I think we could really help to provide some insights as banks for what the future of business could look like in some very interesting and new ways. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you, and you're welcome, and good luck. Thanks. Bye there.
Thanks very much, Johan. So welcome back, everyone. Tia, are we ready to make our transition?
We are, absolutely. This is brilliant. I've that was an amazing conversation about some of the lasting impacts, looking at climate resilience when it comes to banking. So I really do think that we have both the science as well as the analysis and application of a lot of Dr. Rockström and next Kate Raworth's suggestions, but a little bit more on the actual agenda. So as you know, you will see on your C-Event platform that you've got the entire agenda in front of you. You will be able to determine all sessions that you want to apply directly to your own personal device time, as well as to schedule those tabs specifically for you, whatever you enjoy. Go through the actual agenda, click on the ones that you want to join, and that will then be as part of your own sort of schedule. Also make sure that you check out the exhibitors, the websites. You can learn more about our sponsors, and you can join in all of the sessions like you have today. Make sure that you use the question and answer sessions. You'll have access to the chat. You'll be able to upvote questions like you have already. Well done, and thank you very much for doing that also. There's a link on the actual main page to the networking platform, so please use it to connect and make appointments with each other. The Zoom breakouts are for you to connect and deepen your relationships as well. And don't forget to have fun. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tia. I am really looking forward to hearing more from our members as well. We've got some really important Finance for the Future sessions, so we'll have a chance to hear from all of our banks. We've got a really nice feature this year also where all of our Leadership Academy, both participants and alumni, are hosting cafes, sessions, dialogues with our colleagues, so you want to check out that. And the Governing Board Forum will be leading a few discussions that I think will take us into talking about the future of governance, which we want to pay attention to. For me, I'm looking forward to Eduardo Godinez, who's going to bring a perspective from Latin America on what's really different about the return from COVID there. And a number of folks who are in the Spanish-speaking zone. We've got full simultaneous translation, Spanish to English, but in that one, it's going to be English to Spanish. So just want to recognize that. And many thanks for everyone contributing as we go forward. So we have a cultural moment. Tia, do you have one last thing to say?
Really, I think it's to ensure that, in all of this, we have a 24-hour program. Pace yourselves, take your time, relax, grab a cup of tea. And as David said, we're not going to know what time of day it is for you, wherever you are around the world. So really enjoy it. And, have that feeling of a global event. Feel free to join each other's sessions. And that's it from me, really. I'll be seeing you in the Eastern sessions. Thanks, Tom.
We'd like to finish with Mayada. She's a fantastic singer-songwriter from Minneapolis who aspires to use her music to make people slow down and find themselves in a story and be hopeful. And it's really great that our folks from Sunrise Banks as well are going to be having learning journey sessions where we'll go make deep dives into really the way that they're banking, and I want you to take the time to do that as well. So let's just end with that and cue over to our music now. And we'll see you all in about 15 minutes for those who are joining us in the Reconnect with Your Peers.
What's up, Global Alliance for Banking on Values? I hope y'all are having a great conference. I'm Mayada. I am a singer-songwriter from Minneapolis, and I'm going to be playing you one of my songs today. It's called Black is Beautiful, and I wrote this at a time when I was having kind of my own awakening on the fact that like the racist experiences that I had growing up and the experiences with anti-Blackness that I had growing up were like way more structural and way more systemic than I had been told. And I was coming to grips with that. At the same time as a lot of my friends, as a lot of my community members, it was a lot of mourning and a lot of pain at the time. And not that it was like new information or that it was like a new thing that was happening, but just my recognition of it was at a different level than it probably had been before. And so I wrote this song because I knew that I needed it. I knew that a lot of my friends needed it. I knew that Black folks at large could benefit from something like this if they heard it. And I was really thinking about Black children because I knew that I would have needed a song like this when I was a child. And so this was me writing to young me, and also like at the time me, who needed this kind of truth telling in a song form, I guess, to kind of combat all of what was happening and what I was observing and what I was experiencing from the world around me. So as I sing this to all the Black folks who are watching, this is for you. This is a reminder, this is an encouragement of the truth that we are beautiful, that that beauty is multifaceted, that we are resilient, we are worthy, we are brilliant, all of the things. We are all the things. Even though there's so many ways that the structures of the world do not affirm that truth. I just want y'all to like really sit in that and let this wash over you. For those of you who are watching who are not Black folks, there is still an invitation for you in this song. Really, I would like for you to consider, and then act on what you've considered, obviously, how anti-Blackness is alive and well in your communities, in your social circles, in yourself, and figure out what you need to do, how you can act, how you can use your power to dismantle that and work towards a world that actually affirms all life and actually supports all life, including the lives of Black folks. So yeah, this is Black is Beautiful.
Like Billy and Mahalia.
block out the noise, hear the voice. God who made us, well, as she whispers to you, let it break through. And know your black is beautiful. Oh, 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 it's beautiful. So beautiful. We're beautiful. Know your black is beautiful. Thank you.